Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 11th session of the Reliance Foundation Youth Sports Athletics Development Webinar Series 2021. Thank you for attending this webinar today. We are all very excited to have you here with us again today at this webinar, brought to you by Reliance Foundation Youth Sports. Reliance Foundation Youth Sports aims to enable the ecosystem of sport through improvement in infrastructure, skill development of physical education teachers, digital empowerment, and by creating sporting heroes. Reliance Foundation Youth Sports is a countrywide multi-sport platform for school and college athletes. The platform was established to encourage sporting culture in schools and colleges and to enable India's next champions. The contents of this presentations are purely for educational purpose and should not be substituted for medical advice. If you have any questions during the presentation, you may please type it in the Q&A box and they will be responded to at the end of the session. Please make sure to follow our social media pages for more updates on athletics development series and for other RFIs related content. As you already know, regular participants of at this webinars will be awarded a certificate. Additionally, a few lucky ones will be invited to attend our elite webinar series. Today's topic, 400-meter training for young athletes, is being presented by James Hillier, Head Coach, Reliance Foundation Odisha Athletics High Performance Training Center. Welcome, James, and now over to you.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Ajit, and welcome everybody to what is the 11th webinar of this development series. It's been extremely well supported, and we thank you for listening in, and hopefully we've all helped you learn lots of new and exciting things. Today, I'm going to talk about 400-meter training, specifically for young athletes. And in this presentation, I'm going to be focusing on athletes between the ages of about 14 and 18. But some of the things I'm going to be presenting would be applicable to athletes over 18 also. I'm going to be talking about a whole number of things. I'm going to be talking about energy system training. I'm going to be talking about specific training for 400 meters. I'm going to be looking at how you pace the race and various other strategies for being a better 400-meter athlete. So please, if you have any questions, put them in the chat box and I'll do my best to answer them at the end of the presentation. So what does it take to become a successful 400-meter athlete? Well, you must have good basic speed. Speed is always the limiting factor when it comes to 400-meter running. So athletes must have good basic speed. A good relaxed, efficient technique is also very important. So if you have some good sprinters that run with very easy form, that look very easy when they run, it might be possible that they could be good 400-meter runners in the future. Good height is also something that is definitely beneficial for 400-meter runners. It's not essential, but it's certainly an advantage if you are taller. So good tall athletes, we should look out for them in the 400 meters. They must also have the ability to train hard. The 400 meters is a very tough event. Therefore, the athletes should have that ability to train hard and the mindset to train hard. The athletes should be lean. They should have good pacing ability. So athletes should be able to understand the difference between a fast, a medium, and a slow pace on the track and be able to hit the times that the coach sets them. And they should also have good natural lactic acid tolerance. Now, obviously, this improves due to training, but it's very helpful if the athletes have good natural lactic acid tolerance. So if you have athletes that don't die at the end of the races, don't slow down too much at the end of a long sprint, like a 200, then they might be athletes that could be good at the 400 meters. They have good lactic acid tolerance. Now we can break 400-meter runners into three main types. The strength-based 400-meter runners, they are athletes that predominantly maybe come from an 800-meter background, maybe come from a 600-meter background. These are strong athletes, not necessarily overly fast, not known for their speed. They will be good at the 200 meters, but they won't necessarily be good at the 100 meters. They'll be 200, 400, and maybe 600-meter athletes. The second type of athlete is a speed-based athlete, speed-based 400-meter runner. These athletes normally move up from the sprints. So they would normally start with the 100 meters and the 200-meter events. And then over time, as they get older and stronger, they would then move up to the 400 meters. These are speed-based athletes. And the third type of 400-meter runner is a rhythm-based athlete. These athletes are fast and strong, maybe not especially strong in either. They're just very solid with their speed, very solid with their strength, but they're extremely good at running rhythm, running with efficiency, and running a very well-paced race, a well-structured race. However, whichever one of these three athletes you are coaching, or if you're an athlete, whichever one of these three 400-meter runners you are, speed still remains the limiting factor in 400-meter running. You can only be so good if your 200-meter time is X. You will only be able to run a certain time in the 400. So speed development always remains the priority in developing 400-meter runners. So let's now look at 4 areas of developing a 400-meter runner. We can look at physical conditioning, event-specific training, tactical training, and performance mindset development. Let's take physical conditioning. So this would be training such as agility training, balance training, coordination training, proprioception, working on posture, working on the core muscles, and doing upper body weight training or upper body exercises. And the aim of physical conditioning is to get the athlete to move well, to create good movement. And it's important that these are the building blocks for the future of a 400-meter athlete. So when the athletes are young, we must work on these 7 things to help the athlete move better before we really get involved in the event-specific stuff. When we come to event-specific training, we can break that down to 5 main components: acceleration, maximum speed. For those of you that were involved in the presentation I did on speed development for young athletes, you will know all about acceleration and maximum speed, and also endurance speed, speed endurance, as it's more commonly known. Special endurance, which I'll talk about later in the presentation, and then lactic acid tolerance, which is something that we must train with our 400-meter athletes. And I'll talk a bit about all these things later in the presentation. When we're doing event-specific training, we're looking for effective movement. That's really our goal, effective movement. Effective movement that helps the athlete perform the 400-meter race. Then we have tactical training. These are things like running technique and the differences in running technique at the start of the race, when we're in acceleration, the middle of the race, and the end of the race. What happens to running technique when you're tired? Race management, pace judgment, energy distribution. It's important that we don't waste too much energy at the start of the race. If you do that, then the athlete will not have enough energy to finish the race strongly and run a good time or get a good performance. And half of the 400-meter race is on the bends. People often forget this. Therefore, we must do a significant amount of training and getting the athletes used to running on the bends. With this tactical training, we're looking at creating more efficient movement. Efficient movement will help us conserve energy through the race. That will help the athlete perform better at the end and finish stronger, and therefore have a better performance. And performance mindset development, also known as psychology. So we can talk about 6 main areas of performance mindset development. We have to teach, show, and get the athlete to experience and learn how to deal with pressure. We saw many athletes at the Olympic Games do very well under pressure. We saw many do very badly under pressure. We had our Indian hero, Neeraj Chopra, do incredibly well under pressure and win the gold medal. And he did it because he threw big early. He put the other athletes under pressure. And the favorite for the competition, the German Vetter, people had already put the gold medal around his neck. And he didn't even qualify for the final 3 throws. So it just shows what pressure can do to people. It can help and it can hinder. Visualization is an important part of performance mindset development. The athlete should be able to visualize the race. They should be able to feel the race as they run through different parts of the race. Athletes should also look to develop confidence. Confidence is often gained from accurate and consistent training. Once athletes have confidence, then they get belief. And belief in one's ability is a hugely important asset to have. If athletes don't believe in their own ability, don't believe in their performance, they will not maximize their potential. Athletes also need to reflect on performances, good or bad, and look to improve the next time. And part of winning is learning how to lose. So athletes must know, learn, and have a plan in place to deal with failure. And all of these things are really there to aid performance improvement. There's something called the theory of reversibility. Now, the theory of reversibility is a concept that if you stop training something, you will lose it. Now, technique is the hardest thing to develop. It takes the longest time to develop. it also takes the longest time to lose. So if we think about us learning how to ride a bicycle when we were children, maybe, it maybe took a long time to learn the technique of riding a bicycle. But we could go many, many years without riding a bicycle, and we still have the technique to safely and effectively ride the bicycle. Therefore, technique becomes ingrained. Therefore, good technique must be developed in young athletes. And for those coaches working with young athletes, technical development must be your priority. Because athletes that have developed bad technique, it becomes incredibly hard later on in their careers to change that technique and reteach something new, because the technique has been ingrained. Speed is also hard to develop. It takes a long time also to lose, but once you lose it, it becomes really hard to get it back. Therefore, speed must be worked in the whole year, the whole training year. There should be speed work in the training program. It's not something you do at the end of the year just before the competition start. No, you have to work speed on the first day of winter training or off-season training. It won't be flying 30s. It won't be elastic assisted runs or anything like that. It might be some technical drills for speed, or some conditioning drills for speed, or maybe some sprints over a very short distance, 5 or 10 meters. Strength takes less time to develop than speed, but it takes more time to develop than endurance. Endurance is relatively easy to develop. However, many training programs start with endurance and finish with speed. It's called a long to short program. And this came out of Europe, where the winters are cold and the summers are warm. Therefore, it was deemed safer to do endurance work in the winter and build a very solid base, and then only do speed work in the summer when it's hot. We don't have that problem here in India, or most of you don't. We have hot weather most of the year. So we don't need to do huge amounts of endurance and no speed at the start of the year. And flexibility, it's very easy and very quick to develop and very quick to lose. You can lose flexibility in a week, and you can gain flexibility in a week. Therefore, flexibility is something you must always keep doing. Otherwise, you will lose the gains that you've made. So we've talked about the fundamentals of sprint technique must always be developed and improved, especially with younger athletes. Improvements in technical execution should be strongly there in any 400-meter program. In most cases, this alone can render the biggest performance gains, bigger than any other modification in the training program. So execution of good technique, good form, often can elicit the biggest gains, the biggest responses. Let's take an example. An athlete does 180 steps in a 400-meter race. If the coach or the athlete together can figure out how to reduce the ground contact time by 0.01 second per step, that's 1/100th of a second per step, this would translate to an improvement of 1.8 seconds over the whole race, which is a huge performance gain in the 400 meters. And remember, like I said earlier, it's more effective to teach proper technique at the beginning when the athletes are young or at the start of their careers than try and fix an ingrained bad technique. Now, this is quite an important table. Don't worry too much about it at this stage. I will keep referring back to this later in the presentation. But we can break 400-meter training up into aerobic and anaerobic training. And this is a nice guide that I've adapted from a coach called Gary Winkler, who was one of my mentors when I was a young coach. And he came up with this program, this chart, in the mid-1980s when he was head coach at Illinois State in America. And this is the framework for all of the training sessions that he would do. So you can look at this, and this gives you guidelines on how you train the individual components that you need to become a good 400-meter runner. And it gives guidance on the length of the runs, the intensity of the runs, and the recovery between the sets and the reps. So this would be a very useful table to maybe have up, stick it on your wall, or coaches, wherever you write your training programs, maybe stick it in front of you all the time. I always have this with me. Every time I write a training program, I have this chart in front of me every time, and I have done for the past 20 years. It's a very, very important table, and it gives you a framework to work within, and it allows you to work the correct energy systems without doing too much training or training at the wrong intensity or with the wrong recovery. And it allows the athletes to obviously develop correctly. Now, energy systems all run concurrently. So what that means is one energy system doesn't stop and another starts. They run into each other. So they're all operating all at the same time. So the anaerobic system is always working, the aerobic system is always working, but it's happening at different times and at different levels. So this is a really good table for you guys to look at, and maybe take a photo of this, and you can do some research. The coach's name is Gary Winkler. And if you type his name into Google and type in energy systems table, and you'll see a table just like this. His table has another column at the end, which has the total volume also of the training sessions, which will be very useful for the coaches. And on that chart, we had lots of intensity measures. So how do we measure intensity? If we want to do something at 85% intensity, how do we work that out? It's basically the best time times by 100 divided by 85. So in our example, if our 400-meter athlete has run 48.2 seconds for a 400 meters, we would multiply that by 100, divide by 85, and now that gives us our desired time, our 85% time for 400 meters. So if we want our athlete to do 400 meters at 85%, we know that is 56.7. So we can now tell the athlete, we want you to run this repetition of 400 meters in the time of 56.7 seconds. Now let's start to look at training for the 400 meters. We've got four main areas: speed, endurance, specific endurance, really. Endurance means many different things. We're not training for the marathon. We're training for a sprint, a long sprint. Therefore, marathon training, endurance training of that nature is not relevant for 400-meter athletes. Energy distribution and focus and execution. So let's look at speed first. I now want to show you how important speed is for a 400-meter athlete. So the flying 30 is a really nice test that we can do to measure an athlete's maximal speed. So the athlete will run for 30 meters, which will be an acceleration block, and then we will time the athlete from 30 to 60. So in effect, the athlete is running for 60 meters, but we only time the last 30. And we call it the flying 30, because when we start timing the athlete, they should already be at top speed. So based on flying 30 times, we can make predictions on what the athlete should run in other sprint events. So for example, if an athlete can run 3.3 for the flying 30, they can run 11.84 for the 100 meters. They can run 24.09 for the 200 meters. And our event, the 400 meters, they can run 52.58. Now, these are just guideline figures. Now, if we are able to improve the athlete's flying 30 time by 1/10 of a second, and they can now run 3.2 seconds, then look what happens to their 100 meter, 200 meter, and particularly their 400 meter times. The 400 meter time has now come down to 51.34, over a second faster. And all we've done is we've got the athlete basically 1 meter quicker over 30 meters. So can you now see how important speed is in the 400 meters? We improve their flying 30 speed, and we improve their 400 meter speed or timing exponentially. Now let's look at some of the other factors that we need to consider when we're developing speed. So let's focus on the technical improvements first. And we've mentioned that a few times. And at the start of the training year, focus on technical speed first. If you want to improve stride length, and I get this question a lot, how do you improve stride length? Well, it's not by trying to stride out. It's not. And it's not by extending the hip more, i.e. pushing back behind you more and opening up the hip. No, absolutely not. That is incorrect. Big red cross from the teacher for that. It's about improving the ground forces. If you get better force development on the ground, you run with stiffer ankles, and you get off the ground quicker, then what happens is you create a better vertical lift. Therefore, your stride length will be longer. So please, coaches, do not try and get the athletes to stride long. It's incorrect. It's going to end up with injuries, and it's going to slow the athletes down. Please focus on stiff ankles and creating better ground contact times, faster ground contact times with stiffer ankles. And by a product of that, the athletes will naturally increase their stride length. It's something that we shouldn't need to necessarily communicate to the athletes. It should happen naturally. I get very concerned when I hear coaches talking about, I'm trying to increase my athlete's stride length. It concerns me. So be careful with that. And if we do create these forces with good stiff ankles, we're using the tendons more. Therefore, we're producing the forces more reactively, which is a far more efficient way of producing force and a far more efficient way of running. And if we can incorporate this into all of our running sessions, it creates an incredibly productive mindset for training. And if you have a productive mindset in training, then that will carry on into competition. Practice what you want to do in competition in training, not what you don't want to do. So train to succeed, not to fail. And even if the athletes have had a bad session, it doesn't matter. They should have a sense of accomplishment when they leave the track, because we want them coming back to the track for another session. So I've now taken a snippet from the energy systems table, and we can see on there, if we're trying to develop speed, we need to do repetitions within the 20 meter to 80 meter range at between 90 to 95% intensity. And if we wanted to develop the alactic system, which is up to basically 7 seconds, we need to be working at 95% plus intensity. So some example sessions would be 60, 70, 80, and 2 sets of that. 6 to 8 minutes between the reps. What I advise is 1 minute for every 10 meters that the athletes run. This would be for an experienced athlete. If you have a younger athlete, you could maybe reduce that recovery a little bit, because the intensity that the athlete is running at will always be less. And another example of a session would be 3 flying 10s, which would be a 30-meter acceleration and a 10-meter fly. 2 flying 20s, which is 50 meters in total. 30-meter accel, 20-meter fly, which we would time. And 1 flying 30. So a 30-meter accel and a 30-meter fly. And what you can see by this is the volume is pretty low. And if you are working pure speed, you need to keep the volume below 400 meters roughly. Maybe with a younger 400-meter athlete, you could go up a little bit more, maybe to 500 meters. But if you start going above that, it becomes a different system. It becomes more speed endurance, and you're not actually developing speed anymore. You're only developing the ability to maintain speed. Therefore, be careful when you're working speed that you don't do too much volume. And once a week, this should be done, mainly during the specific and the competition preparation phases. Let's now look at specific endurance. So we can do some low-level aerobic work. This helps us develop the capacity to do work. It helps us we're training to train. An example of this would be 3 times 4 times 200 meters at 60% intensity. And you can go back to that intensity slide to work out 60% intensity. Another example would be 3 times 6 times 100 meters at 75% intensity. And you can do this once to twice a week, depending on the time of year. Maybe at the start of the year, when you're trying to get the athletes fit, you could do it twice a week. And then you drop it down to once a week as you're getting closer to the season. And then we have short speed endurance. So this can be known as anaerobic power. Don't worry about these terms, it's not important. Basically, this is higher intensity training, and we're trying to develop endurance through speed. It's very important that you understand that. We're developing endurance through speed. We're not developing speed through endurance. So that's important. We develop speed by doing speed. That's the only way to develop speed. But 400 meters is a sprint. It's a sprint event. Therefore, endurance should have a speed element to it. An example of a speed endurance session is 3 times 4 times 60 meters at 95% intensity. We have a short recovery between the reps, and a long recovery between the sets. So 1 minute between the reps and 5 minutes between sets. You might start with this, and then you might, later on in the year, you might do something like 3 times 2 times 120, with 3 minutes between the reps and 12 minutes between the sets. For those of you that are good at maths, you can add up the total volume of both of these sessions and see what you get. Hopefully, you'll all find that it's exactly the same volume, 720 meters. And that's a nice range for a speed endurance session. We wouldn't want to go too much over that. And when do we start speed endurance? Well, classically about 12 weeks prior to our first competition, something like that. Then we've got special endurance, which is high intensity work to develop long endurance speed. And it is very specific to the event. The best example of special endurance is 3 times 300, maybe even 2 times 300 as you get closer to the season. It's a classic special endurance session. It's all about developing long endurance speed. So 300s, pretty fast, 90 to 95% intensity. So they're quick, but you get a really nice long recovery, maybe 12 minutes between the first and the second rep, and then maybe 15 minutes before the last rep. And the goal would be to make the last rep the fastest. If the athlete can make the last rep the fastest, then they are aligned to our philosophy of training to succeed, not to fail. Another example of a special endurance session for more developing athletes or athletes that don't have the fitness yet to be able to do 3 times 300 with each one getting faster is 300, 250, 200. And we would hope that as the athlete drops distance, that the intensity increases. We can drop the recovery slightly because the distance is different, but the idea is that the 200 at the end is the fastest rep of the 3. Again, we want the athlete trained to succeed. If the athlete runs slow in the last rep, then it's going against the principles of training to succeed, and it's going against the principles of what we want to see in a competition, which is finishing strongly. If you always finish a training session absolutely exhausted and the last rep is always slow, then it's likely that that's the sort of thing that is going to happen in a competition because you're practicing that. So make sure that the athletes are practicing the correct things rather than the incorrect things, because whatever you work on, it's what is going to happen in the competition. Now, special endurance 2 is longer endurance, and this is about lactic acid tolerance. So we do a lot of this work at the start of the year, and a really good session for this is 3 times 600 at 90% intensity. So it's still a good intensity. They're still pretty quick, but they're not at the intensity of the special endurance 1 sessions. And another reason why I like 600 meters is because the distance is 50% more than our competition, 400 meters. And what it teaches the athletes is they have to run efficiently because it's 50% further than the race. It's a long way for many 400-meter runners, particularly the speed-based athletes, the athletes that have come from the 100 and the 200. They hate 600 meters. When you give them a training program with 600 meters in, they literally want to run a mile. not literally run a mile. They want to get away. They do not like 600-meter training. It's not nice for them, but they have to do it because it teaches them how to run efficiently. Because you can't run tense and bag technique effectively over 600 meters. You have to learn how to run in a relaxed, efficient way. Now, we'd mainly do this work towards the start of the year, and then we probably replace this with special endurance work later in the year. Now let's talk about energy distribution and focus and execution. So this is a very, very useful table. So I talked right at the start of the presentation about speed being the limiting factor. So let's look at the advanced male row. So we are assuming that our advanced male can run 21.00 for the 200 meters. Now, if this athlete says to me, Coach, I've run 21.00 for the 200 meters, I want to run 44.9 for the 400 meters. I would say, I'm very sorry, young man. I appreciate your desire to run fast, and I salute you for that and tap you on the back, but that is not possible. That is not possible. You can't run 44 seconds until you can run well under 21. So if your PB is 21 seconds, at your best level, you should be able to go through the 200 meters 1 second slower than your personal best at the halfway stage of the race. So our 21.00 athlete should be able to go through 200 in 22.00. And if they're well trained and they're a good athlete, they should be able to bring it home in 24 seconds for the last 200. Therefore, the differential will be 2 seconds. And the speed reserve will be 1 second. The speed reserve is the difference between the 200-meter PB and the time they go through the first 200 meters in the race. So if the athlete decided to go through the first 200 in 23, the speed reserve would be 2 seconds. Therefore, we would expect the athlete then to finish very strongly because they've got more reserve, more energy reserve for the second half of the race. Therefore, the 200-meter personal best becomes a very important factor when we try to predict what the potential of our 400-meter athlete could be. So like I said, an advanced male that runs 21.00 has the potential to run 46.00. It's as simple as that. Our elite male, maybe they can come home in 1.8, maybe even less. I've not seen the data for the Olympics, but I know at the World Champs, there was a couple of guys coming home with 1.4, 1.5 second differentials. But they were very fast athletes that their first half differential or speed reserve was quite big, close to 2 seconds. Therefore, the differential between the two 200s is slightly different. But this is just a guide. It depends on whether you have a speed-based athlete, a strength-based athlete, or a rhythm-based athlete as to where you want the speed reserve to be. If you have a strength-based athlete, you might want them to go a little bit slower over the first 200 meters and maximize their strength at the end. With a speed-based athlete, you might want to utilize their speed. You might want them to go off hard at the start. And you can see by the novice male, novice female, maybe running 3 or 3.5 second differential, that as you get more trained, then the differential between the two halves of the race comes down. So it's important to avoid too much fatigue and energy loss too early in the race. If we always train to extreme fatigue, that's likely to happen in a race. So let's work on good execution. Athletes must pace correctly. And a training idea might be, instead of doing 3 times 500, maybe you could do 1 times 500 and then 4 times 250s. So you're getting the same amount of volume in, but you're reducing the distance of the runs. Therefore, hopefully the athlete will run with better quality. Another training idea to help pace the athletes is 4 250s going through the 200 meters in the competition target time and getting them used to running through the 200 meters in the time that you want them to go through it. You can also do some race pace segments. So like one speed endurance, but with a race specific element to it. So in our first example, you can run from 150 to 300, probably with a rolling start at race pace. And then you can jog back and repeat three to 4, maybe even 5 in a set, and stop when the time drops below your race segment time. The second example would be a very similar session, but now you're working on different sections of the race. So for example, you can work 100 to 250 with a rolling start. You can walk back 50 meters, and then you can do the next repetition. Walk back 100 meters, and then you can do the next repetition again with a rolling start, 150 to 300, and then you can do 200 to 350. So you're working different elements of the race. It's a really nice way of getting the athletes used to pacing the race correctly. For those of you that were here for my speed presentation, you'll recognize these slides, but I just wanted to quickly show them to you again. So when the athletes set the blocks up for the 400 meters, they need to create a line across the bend. So the first 10 to 50 meters of acceleration should be in a straight line. We should also look at things like the head should be in line with the back should be flat, the arms should be straight. If they're not straight, the athlete's got too much weight going through the hands. Both the feet must be touching the pads. The back leg should be perpendicular to the floor, hands on the fingertips, and hands should be shoulder width apart. If they're wider, it's going to be very hard to support yourself. The hips need to rise above the shoulders. The hands and shoulders maintain alignment. And the most important thing in this is to look at the front and back knee angles. So we want roughly a 90-degree angle on the front leg and a 120-degree angle on the back leg. And both feet should push into the pads. And then when we actually start, obviously in the 400-meter race, the acceleration phase is not as aggressive as in the 100 meters or the 200 meters, but you still need to get out pretty strong. So it's important that you get a good start. So we want to drive the body out at 45 degrees, and we want extension through the whole body and push off the pads with both legs. Let's now look at a couple of videos of some training sessions and a few things happening. This is a maximum speed session. This is a flying 30. So here we'll see the athlete accelerating for 30 meters, and then they'll do a 30-meter fly or a flying 30. So let's just watch.
Push out, push out, push out.
They're driving out.
Now lift and go.
And then, so they run for 60 meters. We just time the last 30 meters. So that's what a flying 30 is. And remember our example where if you can improve that time by 1/10 of a second, that might improve your 400-meter time by well over a second. So it's well worth working on this stuff, guys. So here is an example of an athlete working on endurance speed. So this is a 120-meter effort. She's running very fast, but it doesn't look like she is. She's very, very, very relaxed. Notice the relaxed shoulders, the relaxed face. She's very, very relaxed. Let's just watch that one more time. Just look how easy. She looks like she's going for a jog in the park. No, she's running incredibly quickly. Everything is relaxed. The face is relaxed, the shoulders, the hands. And 400 meters, you have to learn how to run fast and relaxed. Let's now look at a race and see what happens. So what we can see now is we can see the focus on these two athletes here in lanes 4 and 5. So the athlete in lane 4 has gone out quite hard. He's really working the back straight. Now he's going to work into the bend. You can see him lift and go into the bend. Now the other athlete on the inside, he's a very long, tall, rangy athlete. And you can see him now, he's coming through on the inside. And now we're coming into the last 60, 70 meters. Now the athletes want to work on their turnover. So that means they want to shorten their stride a little bit and get to the line. Now, both these guys have run, that was a 46.69. Now, the guy that won that race has run 44.4, and the guy that was second has run 45.6. So these guys weren't at 100% fitness at this time. But what you can see is how they structured the race differently. The athlete on the inside is very much a strength-based 400-meter runner. The guy on the outside is actually a rhythm-based. So he's got good speed and good endurance, but he's more of a rhythmical 400-meter athlete. And you can see they pretty much crossed the line together, but they ran the race very, very differently. And also you could see how towards the end of the race, how the technique was really falling apart for particularly the athlete, the taller athlete of the two. His technique was really falling apart under fatigue. So we've got to try and hold form at the end of the race. And then just to summarize, remember with young athletes, long-term speed development remains the goal. Younger or slower athletes will be more exposed to the aerobic system. So for athletes that are not quick enough yet, maybe keep them at 100 and 200 meters for a bit longer before they move to 400. There's no rush to get them there. Or you can train for 100, 200, and maybe they can do the odd race at 400, but you don't need to move athletes to 400 when they're young. Some of the best 400 athletes I know only moved to 400 when they were 18, 19. They spent their whole teenage years developing speed, and then they only moved to 400 when they were 18, 19. Never view training of any physical performance component in complete isolation. Remember, speed affects endurance. The faster you are, the more speed reserve you have. So the easier it is to run to 200 meters in a fast time. Strength affects speed and endurance. And of course, mobility affects speed and coordination. So thank you very much for listening in. I hope that was insightful, and I'm sure we'll have a few interesting questions now.
Thank you very much, James. I must say it was a wonderful session today. Like a lot of details you gave about the workouts, how to orchestrate the workout for the different capacity athletes. And thank you. There are a lot of questions in the Q&A box. The first question is from Bharat Baglari. He's asking why height is an important factor for a sprinter. I mean, do you think, can you give an example, like is there any minimum height required to be a successful sprinter?
Yeah, I mean, it's based on empirical evidence, to be honest. They did a study of the top, I think it was the top 100 meter, the top 100, 400 meter male athletes of all time. And I think they found that the average height was about 6'2", which is obviously very tall. So they just have an advantage because it's their stride length is longer naturally. They have longer legs, and generally they are a little bit more efficient, taller athletes, and they can get around the track a little bit easier. A shorter athlete, they can still be successful. Don't get me wrong. I mean, the Olympics silver medalist from London 2012, he was actually a junior athlete. He was only, I think, 18 or 19 at the time. He was a guy from the Dominican Republic. Was very short. He was like 5'9", I think, something like that. He won an Olympic medal. So I'm not saying that athletes can't be successful, and you mustn't believe they can't be. They absolutely can. But there is just an advantage if you are a little bit taller. So I think when you're looking for athletes that could potentially do 400 meters, if you've got a nice, tall, easy-looking running athlete, like Stephen Gardner, who won the Olympics in Tokyo. If any of you watched him in the final, I mean, he just looks like he's jogging. I mean, it just looks so easy. I don't think I've ever seen an athlete look so easy. But then you see him 10 minutes after the race, and he's near on dying at the side of the track. So it obviously was very difficult, but he makes it look so easy. So yeah, I think it's not a hard and fast rule, but I think if you're looking to find good 400-meter athletes, if you've got someone that's lean, tall, good speed, good relaxed technique, they certainly have the attributes to be more successful. Yeah.
Thank you, James, for that. And another question from, he hasn't given his name here. Is it advisable for a 12-year-old boy to train for and compete in 400 meter?
My advice would be develop speed. There's nothing wrong in doing the odd race, but I would focus on 100 and 200. Maybe even multi-events actually at that age more. So I would look to develop speed. I would look to develop jumping ability. So I would be doing long jump. I would be doing hurdles. Maybe they can do some high jump as well, some throws. So you want to create an all-round athlete with a youngster like that. Even if you think they could be a good 400-meter runner, if you teach them how to hurdle, they could be an even better 400-meter hurdler. So I don't rush with picking the events. Even if you think, yeah, I think this guy long-term will be a 400-meter runner, that's fine. When they're 12, they should be doing other events. They should be doing multi-events. You should be working on coordination, technique, all of the stuff, you know, that I talked about in the physical preparation side of things. Yeah. No rush to do 400s, but they can do the odd one. That's fine. But I wouldn't specifically train for it. I would advise against that.
Thanks, James. You meant to say that at the younger age, we should focus on multilateral development instead of focusing on one event. And maybe after 15 or 16, we can start focusing on developing him as a special 400-meter runner or 400-meter.
Yeah,
runner.
but even then, it might be there 200, 400. You know, so yeah. I would still want to keep the speed in there. You know, but yeah, you're absolutely right. Correct.
Yeah. Thanks, James. Our next question is from Reha Jumwal. She's asking, apart from doing a field test for lactic acid tolerance, is there any lab test available? Is there any test which can be done in a lab to measure the lactate tolerance?
The problem, I mean, you can do, you know, you can do stuff on treadmills and things, but the problem is you want things to be as field-based as possible, because otherwise you're losing the specificity of it. So I guess it depends what you want to measure. But I personally don't do any lactate testing with my 400-meter athletes. I have done a little bit in the past. I'm still not sure how it hugely helps us in the 400 meters. I think the middle distance fraternity, it would be hugely beneficial for them to do that sort of testing. But I think 400 meters, I guess, you know, you can. I prefer, where possible, if you can do a field-based test. For me, that is always preferential.
Thanks, James. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, right. Next question is from Shailendra Prasanna Burma. He's asking how many strength sessions are required for a quarter miler in a week. I think he meant for seniors, not for juniors.
Okay, sure. I mean, again, it depends on what sort of program you're running. I do 3 strength sessions a week, but I know some very, very successful 400 meter coaches, world-class coaches that only do 1, and they do significantly more running. So they get their strength development through running. I prefer to get my strength development through the gym. So it really depends on what sort of coach you are. But yeah, I would say 2 to 3 times per week is good. But you don't want to kill the nervous system that you're going to affect the speed. So look at where you do that training. If you have speed training, you want to be fresh for the speed training. So, maybe you shouldn't do strength training the day before speed training. It depends. I mean, I actually do, because I'm looking to train the athletes for rounds. So I look at hitting the nervous system 2 days in a row, but I'm working with pretty experienced athletes that have been training many, many years. I wouldn't do that with young athletes. I would have a rest day before speed training, or a very easy day, maybe some accelerations or something, or some circuits, body weight circuits, something like that before speed. So yeah, it's hard to give you an exact answer, as with many of these questions, I'm afraid. I'm sorry, guys. It's very difficult to give a precise answer. But I would say, yeah, probably 2 to 3 times per week. But just look at where you put those sessions and make sure that the strength sessions support the track sessions. The track sessions are the most important things. I think as long as you consider that, then you'll be fine. You'll be fine, and your strength training will be effective.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, James. Next question is from Anand P. He's asking, is it okay to do speed and speed endurance training in the same session? I think I answered this question in your previous presentation. I think, if you could explain that again, that would be good.
Yeah. I mean, obviously you can. You can mix the 2 things up. By nature, what happens is anything over 400 meters becomes speed endurance by nature. So I personally prefer to, when I'm in a solid training block, I would separate the 2. When I'm preparing for a competition, and perhaps I don't need to do speed development anymore, I just need to do speed maintenance, then I might put the 2 things together. So what I might do is I might do maybe 150 or 200 meters of speed, and then I might do some speed endurance afterwards. In fact, our athletes are currently training for the nationals on the 15th of September, and actually they have done some speed flying runs, and then they did some long speed endurance afterwards. So, and the reason I did that was not because I'm developed speed. I'm happy with the speed. We're a month out, and I need to teach the athletes to run a bit more easily when they run. I feel like they're fighting a little bit when they run. So we basically did 3 flying 20s, which is a 50 meters, 20-meter fly, and then they did 300 fast, a 250 fast, and a 200 fast. And they're 100-meter and 200-meter athletes. And I did it because I wanted some slightly over distance, because I want them, when they get to the competition on the 15th, that they feel like mentally the 200 is easy and they're not frightened of the distance. Because we've had some internal competitions, and the athlete I'm working with, he's run 2 PBs in those competitions, which is great, but I still feel he's fighting the distance and he's scared of the distance. So I think when you get near to competitions, you must always be thinking about what the athlete needs for the competition. And that actually becomes the driver to what's in the training, not the other way around. Now, if competition was 6 months away, I would be doing pure speed on a Tuesday, because we do speed on a Tuesday. I would just be developing speed even further. I wouldn't even be thinking a huge amount about the competition. But the minute we're in a competition phase or we're preparing for competition, the competition becomes the key thing. And that becomes the thing that drives the training. So I think that, I don't know if I've answered your question, but I think I've certainly given you maybe a different way of thinking. So I hope that's helpful, not confusing.
Not confusing, James. Thanks for that. One last question. From Siddharth Gaur, he's asking, could you please explain how to calculate the intensity of each workout again? And you had a very detailed slide on that part. And you
just times your final time. So if your 400-meter time is 48.2, I think we put in the example, and you want to do runs, 400-meter runs, or you want to do 300-meter runs that are 85% intensity of your 400-meter intensity, you put 48.2 times 100 divide by 85. And I think in our example, it gave us 56.7. So you then know it's 56.7 for the 400. If you're doing 300-meter runs, then you just divide by 4 times by 3, and that gives you your 300-meter time.
All right.
You have to be good at maths to be a 400-meter coach, I'm afraid, guys. So if you didn't listen in school in maths, you're now regretting it. Okay.
Sure. James. Yeah. That was the last question. To you, James. Yeah. Thank you so much, James, for hosting such a wonderful and informative session. I'm sure all of us have gained valuable knowledge from it. Now I'd like to hand it back to you, James, if you have some parting words for our attendees.
So I think the main thing for me is to just have 2 hats on. One is what I want my athlete to do in the short term, and 2, what I want my athlete to do in the long term. We must always be coaching our athletes with their best long-term development in mind. So therefore, even if we think we've got a young athlete, we think they could be good at 400, we must develop the qualities that could make them be an even better 400-meter runner long-term. So be patient, be race them over 100, 200 first, and just wait a few years before you expose them to the 400. So be patient, be athlete focused, make sure that you're doing the right thing for your athletes, and you'll all be really, really successful. Thanks for tuning in. Good luck, everybody. And I'm sure I'll see you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Thank you once again. And a big thank you to all the participants for attending today's session. We hope you enjoyed it, and we look forward to seeing you back with us next Friday, that is 20th August at 4 p.m. at our next webinar on injury self-management, presented by Nilesh Makhwana, Senior Sports Physiotherapist at Sir H.N. Reliance Foundation Hospital, Mumbai. Before you leave the session, we request you kindly fill out the feedback form that you'll be able to see after the end of the session. On behalf of the entire RFI's family, thank you once again. We hope you all have a great weekend ahead.